Thanks for that introduction. Yeah, pizza. We talked pizza before we came here. Just some background on us. I come from a group called Berkeley Data Science Group, where we do research. So I was a scientist before I became a data scientist in biology, as you said. And I'm very interested in understanding the way the world works. And this is one of our projects that we've built out just to see if we can use data science to better understand the way the world works. So just a little background there. Okay, so we can dig in here a little bit and just think about the biotech domain as a graph, like just a very rough graph. And there was a time when I was looking for jobs in biotechnology. Can you guys all see that red pointer? Or is it too small? I'll use my hand if it's not too small. All right, so so biotechnology in general has very diverse groupings: agricultural, pharmaceuticals, information technology, your biochemicals, nanotechnology, devices. This is actually a very broad and sort of confusing domain if you're looking for a job. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? How do you make sense of this? And on top of that, there's a lot of very
green pointer right there.
Fantastic. There are a lot of very wild claims in biotech. So at one point, I was looking at getting jobs in biotech, and I wanted to know how to make sense of this. That led to this project. Now, if you try and think about where the money is in biotech, you might want to think about who's investing in biotech and how much is being invested. When I looked into this, it's actually kind of frightening. There's a lot of money going in, right? We all know that pharma and drugs, there's a lot of money in pharma and drugs. But the returns are relatively big quarterly, right? So maybe you have a $6.2 billion quarterly investment and 106 billion coming out. So there's some money being made. But estimates put the liquidation events at 11%. Our data actually shows lower levels of liquidation. And these aren't small shops. These are all shops that are trying to be successful. So 90% failure, right? So if you think about that, you might want to, as a data scientist, say, can we do better and how, right? So that led us to this project. So you can see another estimate over here. Basically, you've got 44% of deals from this data set being classified as fully failed, right? And then some return on some of these deals, and then a lot of return on some of these deals. So there's a famous quote that investing in biotech is a lot like playing at Las Vegas, and you may win big, but a lot of times you're going to lose, right? Again, we want to know if we can do this in a smarter way. So you can see the startup cycle here. So the valley of death is when you start out. We want to know, trace this startup cycle as you go to different investment phases, the early stage, later stage, and then finally IPO. So for this analysis, we take IPO as our mark of success. If something IPOs is successful, if it fails to IPO, we call it not yet successful. And so that's how we define success. Okay. And then you might want to think about what are the features that we're interested in, sort of brainstorm these features. Some things might be the company, right? What is the company here? Who are their investors? Maybe think about the idea. What's the idea that they have? Is it valuable? Is it timely? Is it an idea that's going to work? Have they done their due diligence? Is there actually research behind it? And what type of research? How are the teams composed, right? That's another thing we might want to think of. Team dynamics, experience. And then we can move on to staff, right? So basically, all the things that are black are things we scraped data on. We got public data from. And then the gray things are things that we think may be important in the future. Maybe we can optimize models on. So let me just go down this. So the staff, experience and reputation. Who are these people? Can we figure out who they are automatically, right? Can we build a model based on this? Staff composition, again, this would go back to team. Do they have staff that actually complements each other? Do they have the fundamental skill set? Then prior scientific record, right? This one's a good one because we have good data on this. A lot of this stuff is a little bit harder to assess, but scientific record is not. And then the market, right? So market favorability, geographic region, technological domain, the current economic climate. Okay. So again, how do you define success? You might define success in a number of ways. Liquidation is a good definition of success. Again, we use IPO event as our definition of success. Maybe positive return on investment, so liquidation versus startup funding is another good way to define success. And again, I'll talk about IPO events here. You can see our basic data model here. So we've got data from the web, public biotech data, right? So this data is things like company size, location, amount invested, key staff, right? And you can see leadership, tech domain, technology domain, funding history. And then we have this publication data, which I particularly like. That's PubMed. We'll talk more about that in a minute. What we found was we have two types of people, science people and business people, at least in our view of the world. We can divide those people up in a way. And then we stuffed everything into a Mongo database and did our analysis on that data set. Okay, so let's just think about it. Do we actually have a signal? So we proposed all this, we built out this structure, and the question is there actually a signal there? Is there any usable information that we can get that's better than what people might be using to make their investment decisions or build out their companies or get jobs or whatever else they want to use this information for? So you can see that the days to IPO is changing. So year founded is very important for time to IPO. So you can see this data right here. Very clear trend. You can see this trend represented again here, right? So this would be years to IPO, broken by decade. You can also see funding amounts. And I like this figure over here because it looks like something was happening about 10 years ago, right, in biotech. And it's not happening so much here, except the days to IPO is still going down, but there was a lot of investment here, a lot more investment. Okay. And one other thing that we noticed is that the location seems to be pretty important, both in size of the number of companies that are IPOing, and let's show the days to IPO. No, this is just the number of records and days to IPO in color. So right, so the green ones are the ones that are going to IPO very fast, right? So we've got some obvious patterns there. You can see also that some of these names, like the larger ones with the total funding amount coded in green, you can see Cambridge, San Diego, San Francisco, a real big hotspot, Seattle. So these are important places for biotech if you want to IPO and get funding. Now let's dig in a little bit more. We can look at staff. So we had records on 4,896 staff across 3,000 companies, right? So that's what we got. And you can see that we actually were able to split them just based on whether they have a publication record or not. So about half of these people were classifying as business people, and half were classifying as scientists in this broad operationalization of who's a scientist and who's not. This is important because these scientists, we can get a lot more information about them just from the PubMed record. Okay, so scientific staff, this is just one thing we could get, the number of positions. So we got these people who are sort of outliers in our data set, the number of positions held. We've got George Church up here, William Burns, and Ian Clark. And this is just sort of like looking at the data to try and figure out if there's actually important information coming out again. And you can see that obviously George Church, you probably should know who he is. He's a very big person. He's got 63,000 citations, right? So he's a very big person in genomics, George Church. And then these other people, William Paul Burns and Ian Clark, we don't know exactly why these guys came up as being in so many different companies. This one appears to be involved in IoT and wearables. He doesn't have very many citations at all, right? But he does have some. So maybe this is a domain expert in IoT and sensors. And then this person seems to be another domain expert in maybe international relations. Oh, yeah. And let's see. So the question remains, is there something important about scientists? We know that we can get data on them, but we want to know what exactly being a scientist tells us. What does having a scientist in your company tell us? So we did this, this survival analysis where you can see that, and survival is operationalized as proportion IPO. So when a company dies, right, it IPOs, right? So it's going out of the game. And the time to IPO is sped up if you have more than 50% scientists. So it appears that if you're a biotech company and you're founding members, so obviously this isn't the whole staff, it's just the people who are represented easily scrapable on the web. If you're 50% of those people are scientists, you have a lot, you're going to IPO faster, or it's associated with faster IPO. Okay, so I mean, I feel like this established that we have some signal, and we have signal that's actually predictive of IPO. Now, can we build a model that's gonna be able to be automatically predict IPO? So we looked at a number of models, all families, right? Regression-based, logistic regression, partial least squares, discriminant analysis, SVM, flexible discriminant analysis, and some decision trees. It turns out that some of these have performed very similarly. Logistic regression, I don't know if you guys saw the earlier talk, but logistic regression performed very well relative to others. We did find that decision trees performed slightly better. Some decision trees performed slightly better, and obviously they're interesting. So I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Okay. Now, this is our confusion matrix. What I want you to focus on is this. So what we're saying is we can capture 29% with our model. We can capture 29% of the ones that actually IPO, right? So this may or may not seem impressive to you. I'm not sure, depending on your perspective. But think about this. We have 2% false positives, and we're capturing 29% of the signal with the model, right? And we can, using a gradient-boosted classifier, I just want to contrast that with what the situation is now. So this would be the entire test set, and it's over 600 companies. So most of these have money, right? So you could either invest in over 600 and find that 7% of them are succeeding from this data set, or you can focus just, so that would be the entire data set, or you can focus just on these 31 companies and get 14 successful. So there's a huge increase in efficiency of deployment of money if you take this strategy, right, over just taking a blanket strategy across all companies. So that's the value statement for the model. What are the features? For me, as a biologist, I find it kind of interesting because the features are sort of generic, right? They turn out to be things like whether they're scientists, how many scientists are there, how many collaborators do these scientists have, so general footprint stuff. And then tech domain, is it a devices company? Is it a company that's a data company? You know, so there's 5 or 6 different categories of tech domain that we can use, and then company size, like number of locations and this type of thing, number of affiliates. But this is all really general data. It really doesn't have a lot to do with like the details of the people and the companies. And I believe that we can enrich the model more as we dig in more into the details. Well, anyway. You can also look at this information here. If you look at our website over here, here's just our first website, and you can dig into our IPO Explorer. This tool here is an app that we built that predicts valuation amount based on a logistic regression. And these over here are features that we pulled out, and you can click on any of these things, and one of the companies will come up. Like this is 23andMe right there. It'll give you a prediction of IPO amount, and then you can change the features. So maybe you want 23andMe with less founders or something. You can use these sliders to change that. Okay, so I sort of pitched this a little bit. I think that's sort of a good basic model, getting basic financial stuff off of the web. But what we really want to do is like quantify scientific networks, quantify scientists, quantify companies, figure out exactly what the richness of this information is. So one question is like, what expertise do scientists have? There. Okay. I mentioned the PubMed database. PubMed is the collection of all scientific literature that we have available to us. You can actually get articles and get abstracts off of here. And that's just what we did. And there's 24 million publications. 1.5 million, you can get the full text because it's public, like PLOS, Public Library of Science publications. And what we pulled the full, the 1.5 million and then got information out of those. In this analysis, we're just looking at publication titles, authors, and co-authors, right? So you could build a co-author network as well. So you can think about scientific expertise from the titles, right? So like here's one title, PQM1 complements DAF16 as a key transcriptional regulator of DAF2-mediated development and longevity. So there's some specific words in there, but there's also some very more general words that can give you information about what this person does, like things like transcriptional and longevity. Those are important words that will come up over and over again in this person's publications. Mother-daughter asymmetry of pH underlies aging and rejuvenation in yeast, right? So this person's yeast, and they study aging, rejuvenation. Maybe they study things about pH, right? Okay. And what you can do is you can pull this out and build it into a knowledge graph. So here's person one, Colleen Murphy. That's my postdoc advisor. We got a person number. It says that she's an author. We're using Kraken AI, which is one of our favorite knowledge graph tools. Just a plug for our favorite tool. And you can get a title as a node over here, article, and then the collaborators, right? So you connect the collaborators through the article. And in this network we can use to build out, to get more features about this individual. One thing that I'm primarily interested in is if I want to find Colleen Murphy as a co-founder, I want to know like, what's her network, what's her expertise, what's her friends' expertise, do her friends know her friends, right? So we find that a lot of these networks, like they spread outwards or they go inwards, and we can talk more about that as well. Okay. This is not. Okay, so yes. So you can look at the network I built for Colleen Murphy, and basically she's in the center, and it looks like a big hairball here, but I'll show you another network, and you'll see that it is very different. And also the other thing about this is that there are subdomains already being formed over here. So they have like these little communities. This is my my PhD advisor, so postdoc advisor, PhD advisor. He's quite a different person, and you can see that reflected directly in his network. Both of them have high impacts as scientists, both of them have a lot of accolades, but they're very different in their style of doing science. And you can see what he's got is he's got these very large communities that are very tight. Okay, we can actually quantify these over here. So you can see Scott Emmons over here, Colleen Murphy over here, and three other people that we found were very interesting. What this shows you is the number of papers, the number of co-authors, the number of secondary and tertiary connections. So these are people, right? So you've got the papers would be the first connection, and then the secondary are the co-authors, and then the tertiary are the co-authors of co-authors, right? So you can see that this person over here has very few papers and very few secondary connections. You can move out to the tertiary network and you get some sort of a community. Scott has a lot of secondary connections right here, but his network really doesn't blow up past 10,000 until you get to the tertiary community, right, past 10,000 co-authors. And Colleen Murphy, she's got the first degree of co-authors is already high, and the network blows up quite a bit with secondary. And you saw that in the last network graph that the network was very big, and then the tertiary network's quite a bit bigger. And this person, you can see a different topology right over here. So basically, you've got the network blows up in the secondary. So this is a person who has most likely a very big network. And then this is somebody, Gunther Eisenbach, who has a lot of papers, but the co-authors is relatively low. And this was an interesting person that came out of our analysis. It turns out he is a star, but he's also an editor. So a lot of the things that he's editing are coming up as his papers, so it's something of an anomaly. We can use these word clouds. I know word clouds are probably not the most ideal for quantitative analysis, but they do give like a real gestalt. Again, this is Colleen Murphy over here, and you can see that she's a big longevity and aging person, and this comes directly out of her titles. So if I was interested in a company that was doing longevity and aging, I'd want to see a lot of clouds like this, or a lot of enrichedness of these words. Doesn't work as well if you go to secondary and tertiary connections, but you do see like genomics functional, right? So functional right here. Okay. And then we can dig more into the collaborator graph to just think about like, again, like as you go to secondary connections, so we have a graph over here, as you go to secondary connections, how connected are those networks? So basically, here's a network with different people. We might want to consider Paul. Now Paul knows Jessica and Melissa knows Paul. So this would be a closed loop over here. We'll call this a wedge, or a triangle actually. And then in this case, we've got Dennis over here, so Paul knows Jessica, who knows Dennis. This is actually a wedge, right? So this is a wedge over here, not a triangle, and it's not connected. So those are two different, very different networks or very different relationships. Okay, so you can look at these individuals and look for the wedge to triangle relationship. And for example, Scott Emmons has a lot of triangles. Colleen Murphy has some wedges, and this person who we talked about before, S. Ning, has a lot more triangles. So again, this network is a lot more interconnected, and we can quantify that with this this index, right? Okay, so that's the machine learning model. That's the way we intend to enrich it as we build it out. With wedge to triangle ratio and other features. And then finally, something that's a little bit more personal is like, if I was a biologist looking for a job, where would I want to look for a job? And what I'm going to argue now is that we can use the same data set to get very good information about different cities, right? May be important to somebody like an individual who wants to look for a job. So we can look at startups in most cities. Like what we found here is that the number of cities and the number of biotech startups in the city is very skewed right here. So there are a lot of biotech cities that have only one biotech startup, 2, 3, or 4. These are obviously not good biotech hubs, right? But there are some very rich biotech hubs. Again, this is important for our model as well because we want to know which of these hubs are really important for biotech success. We can take the top 20. You can see the names exposed down here. Now, I should point out that like San Diego, Cambridge, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, Boston, these are the obvious ones, but Boston and Cambridge, right? San Francisco and Menlo Park, South San Francisco. So we have a lot of multiple hits up over here because we're breaking out the subdomains of the regions. But you can see like San Diego and is probably the best place to do biology. Maybe San Francisco because we split this up over here. And actually, Austin's not that bad. We can split those out. Since we're in Austin, we're looking at Austin. And since I live in Austin, San Francisco, San Diego, and Austin. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting is you might want to ask yourself, because we know that scientists are important. So in the companies in these places, what percentage of scientists are there, right? That might be important for the culture for your job, or that might be important for whether you want a successful company, right? Or both. And then the other thing is what percent IPO. Interestingly, in San Francisco, it looks like there's a ton of scientists, right? And that sort of reflects like I think it's a very attractive place for scientists and a lot going on over there. But the percent IPO is not as stellar as a place like Austin, for example. So you've got like a lot higher percent IPO in Austin, and you've got the companies have quite a bit fewer scientists. Same thing with San Francisco or San Diego right here. So. Yeah, and there's just some stats, right? So we looked at the percent IPO, the percent of companies reaching IPO in less than 6,000 days. In the target cities, about 16% reach out IPO, and about 21% scientists in the target cities, right? Okay. Another thing we can do is we can use our PubMed data and look at the enriched words in each of these cities, right? So you've got the actual quantification of the enriched words in the titles, and you can see that in San Diego, vaccinia virus comes up, cell, tumor, study. So these are the keywords. I think vaccinia virus is the most important one because there's a center in San Diego for studying vaccinia virus. Something similar comes up in Austin. You've got lung cancer and cancer in general. I believe cancer came up high right here. Yeah, cancer top, lung. This is the same thing. Cell trial, but lung cancer. There's a lung cancer journal that comes out of Austin. So that's important, and also it'll tell you something about what's the sort of the gestalt of that city. And then an interesting thing is San Francisco doesn't come up with any particular words that have a lot of focus. If you drill down, though, there's a lot of very small frequency words that are sort of like cutting edge technologies. A lot of like bleeding edge technology that comes up, and then cell, which is a very general word, right? But I think that reflects what San Francisco is there's probably a lot of sort of high risk and bleeding edge technology working there. Okay, so what are the conclusions? So biotech investing can be better targeted, and we think we can do this with this tool. With a basic set of features that we've gotten off the web, we can do this. I argue that there's a lot of room for growth with this tool. We can actually get much more rich information from PubMed and from about founders. And then when you're looking for a job in biotech, you really should use something like this tool to figure out which cities have which gestalt. And then there's quite a bit of intelligence in the PubMed collaborator graph. I've seen a few of these analyses on the web. I think that there's a lot more that can be done with them, though, as I'm trying to demonstrate here. And that's it. So these are our websites. This is our CEO. This is me. If you're interested at all in what we do, this is where you can find us.